Good. I'm running this morning. My mother-in-law has a doctor appointment that I didn't know about this morning, so
Oh,
I would take her. So I have to be done by 9:40.
oh, okay. All right. We'll do our best we can then.
Okay.
All right. So let's get right into it. How was your week?
It was pretty good. I feel like I made progress in like being more loving to myself and being okay with what I look like right now. And when I get out of the shower, I would think, okay, I can do this. I love myself. I've had baby. I look at my stomach. I've had 4 babies. So I feel like I've done pretty good with that. Although yesterday we were at choir practice and Molly took a picture of me to send to her friend to be like, hey, my mom's the only alto, so you need to come. And today I saw the picture that she took, and then I was just like, oh, gross. So, 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Yeah. Isn't it amazing how pictures, for some reason, see
Yeah.
yourself from a different angle than you never see yourself?
Yeah.
It's hard to see past that and just see yourself as other people see you. You
Right.
know, you
And
focus.
I did that. I was like, but that's how other people see, like, that's how my girls see me, because I bought this new jacket, but it was just that I was sitting and like you said, and the girls were like, oh, I like your jacket. They didn't say, wow, mom, you look so fat in that jacket. I mean, they still
Mhm.
love me and they see me as their mom. And, so I did think about that too.
Yeah, and the funny thing is we don't go around looking at other people and worrying about what they look
Right.
like. Yeah.
Right.
And yet, yeah, for some reason pictures are like the nasty foe, right? That's great. How was Thanksgiving for you?
It was good.
Good.
Yeah, we had lots of family. So on that whole end of things, the whole eating part, it hasn't been great. I feel like I just my brain is not getting the I need to stop when I'm full.
Hmm.
Like it's not until a half an hour later that I'm like, oh, I'm so stuffed and I feel so gross. I eat so fast, I don't even give my body a chance to get full. And by the time I am full, it's too late, kind of a thing.
Hmm.
So I'm struggling with that. It's just super hard for me. And I
Okay.
don't.
So we need to identify what food is doing for you because it's giving you something positive or you wouldn't do it. Right? So what do you think? Think of the last time because it may be different every time depending on what your needs are at the moment. So think of one time this week when you felt that happen.
Well, last night it happened. And again, I was just like, what happened? I don't even know what happened.
All right, well, let's analyze it. Tell me about the situation first of all. Tell me what you do remember.
So I felt kind of rushed. We all got home a little bit later, and I was making dinner, and I felt like I was doing everything, but I didn't ask anybody else for help. And I was thinking to myself, why am I doing this? Why am I not asking anyone? Because I have 4 kids and a husband that are very capable of helping me. So I guess I kind of felt that. I felt like I needed to hurry up and get it done because Derek had just gotten home and I knew he was hungry. And it wasn't quite ready, but we had other snacks and stuff out. So I just kept eating those things.
Okay.
And then by the time I sat down for my meal, I don't know if I was even hungry. I didn't think about it, but I probably wasn't. I had been eating crackers and
We're not as hungry, right?
yeah,
Which is fine. That's
right,
what snacks are supposed to do, right?
right.
Okay, so far, I mean, you've identified there was some self-pity going on, that you needed some help, didn't ask for it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say maybe self-pity slash feeling like a victim. Oh, I'm
Okay.
so familiar with this feeling. I'm so familiar with it. It is such a plague for me. Yeah. And that for me, that goes along with resentment. How about with you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So
Yeah.
some resentment. Yeah. I can never have self-pity without resentment. They go hand in hand.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so some self-pity and resentment. Were you overly hungry at the time?
No.
Okay, so just hungry and in a hurry.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I mean, right there, there's 3 reasons, 4 reasons, right? So
Yeah.
so food is kind of helping you kind of numb those feelings of feeling resentful and feeling self-pity and feeling like you're in a hurry and you just got to get this done. And if
Yeah.
you're just like me, which is when those feelings come up, it's hard to even care if you're eating intuitively. You know what I mean? It's like whatever. My emotions have to be dealt with first. You
Yeah.
know? It's kind of like you go into survival mode. Even if I think the hard thing is it's easy to see when we have major issues come up, then we can justify, okay, I see the emotion was too much, I just dealt with it. But it's hard to realize that because it's such a habit, and it's just that our lifestyle is how we numb the little times too. A little bit of resentment, a little bit of self-pity, a little bit of whatever. So there's a couple ways you can deal with it. What can you think of? Let's say that happens again tonight. You have a couple of options that I can think of. What are some of the options you can think of?
Well, to not be in a hurry, I can plan ahead better and get things ready before that.
Okay,
I
so
can,
sometimes you're able to do that. Not always, but
yeah,
sometimes, right? So
yeah,
when you can plan ahead. What else?
I can ask for help. That's
Why is that so hard?
easy. I don't know.
Why is it so hard? Because you know what? If you're like me, if I'm in self-pity, I feel like I shouldn't even have to ask. You should love me enough to help me, right? You should love me enough to get off your butt and get over here and help me. But we can say, I could really use some help right now. Would you? And what I find is my husband needs very specific instructions. Like
Yeah,
if I say I need help, he has no idea what that means. If I say, could you set the table? He knows what that means.
right.
Okay, so you could ask for more help. What else?
Um, I don't know.
Come on, get creative.
um, I could somehow become aware of what I'm feeling, but I don't know how that happens.
It's so hard to do in the moment. I
Yeah,
I've gotten to the point where I can immediately say, what, I'm feeling some self-pity here. But that doesn't mean I really have the time to deal with it at that moment, you know? But maybe I can quickly say, okay, this is, I probably shouldn't be dealing with this the way I am. But you can say, okay, I'm feeling resentful. Like that you can identify pretty quick. And then you can say, what do I need to ask for? Right? Because if we're resenting somebody, it's because we're not getting one of our needs met. Right? And so usually it's because we don't ask, but often, and in some situations you may ask and people won't give you what you need anyway. But at least if you ask, then you can't, half the time it's our own fault, I think, because we don't open our mouths and say anything about it. But so part of it is, I think you're right, learning to recognize your feelings as quickly as you can. You may not have time to sit and analyze everything, but if you can start to recognize self-pity, what are the ones we identified when we were doing the 12 steps? Self-pity, resentment, was it pride and fear? Those are my 4. That's what comes to mind.
mine was control, patience, judgment. Those are some of my big ones.
Okay, so when you start recognizing those, if those can just be a little red flag, something that pops up quick that says, okay, you're in one of your 3, so be careful, right? Tread lightly because these are your 3 challenges. And then, maybe that's your cue to say, okay, what do I actually need right now? Because food is filling a need. So if you can say, what do I actually need? Do I need help? Do I need a break? Do I need to talk to somebody about something that's frustrating me? Do I, whatever, if you can quickly figure out what the need is and meet it in a way that's actually going to help, then you're less likely to be stuffing it down with food.
Yeah.
I find, and tell me if this is true for you, I find that I stuff it down with food when I don't think there's an actual way to get my need met.
Well, with me, I feel like I am not learning anything because every time this happens, you're like, okay, you're eating for, a reason. I'm like, oh yeah, like I just,
It takes
I'm
time. It takes
not
serious
cute.
time and practice. It takes serious time and practice, right? So it's okay, even right now. Okay, so you've identified already control, patience, judgment were the three. So which of these would it fall into?
Last night,
Mhm.
all of them.
Okay. Okay, so you could have at least quickly said, okay, I'm not happy right now, and I know I'm eating when I shouldn't, I don't really need to be eating right now. And actually, if you were hungry, there's nothing wrong with having a snack before you eat dinner, right?
Yeah.
But if you can identify quickly the negative emotions and just say, okay, it's one of those three. You already have three you're going to choose from. You don't even have to think through all the emotion. You don't have to think through everything. You just be like, am I feeling controlling? Am I feeling impatient? Am I feeling judgment? Okay, then you know you're in a danger zone, right? And so then you can decide, what do I want to do at this exact moment until I can deal with it in more detail? If you can think about at the moment, did you think about during the moment that you needed some help and didn't ask for it?
Yes.
Oh, at that moment. Okay. Okay. So that's one thing immediately you thought of. You just didn't act on it.
Right.
Right. But you identified, I need help. Why aren't I asking for it? Why do you think you didn't ask for it?
Um, uh, I think at that point I was almost done with what I was doing. And so at that, I was like, well, it's too late now. Why?
Okay. Okay. So now you're going to recognize more that you need help earlier. Right. And say, okay, I'm going to ask for help from the beginning. So maybe your goal for the next 24 hours is to ask for help when you need it.
Okay.
Right? Something as simple as that. Because it's funny, it's like we don't value ourselves and our need for help, right? And so we feel like we don't value ourselves, so we don't even ask for the help. It's like somehow it's my job to take care of everybody else. But then at the same time, we feel resentment because we know it's not just our job, right? And we know that other people should be doing it, but we somehow expect them to think about that. So think about it. Then we don't ask for help. And so we train them that we're just fine doing it all by ourselves.
Yeah.
So then they're completely fine not helping us, and we're training them not to help us.
Right.
But if we start speaking up for what we need, we're actually training them, oh, other people need help when things are going on, right? We're helping them to be more aware of other people and their needs. And we're getting the help that we want.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we think we're doing them a favor by doing everything ourselves. We just end up resentful, and they learn not to help other people.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm every bit as guilty of that as you are sometimes. I think that's a mom thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so just remember that food is always meeting a need. If we can figure out what the need is and meet it in a way that actually works, then we don't feel such a need to eat.
Yeah.
But we got to figure out what the need is and then be willing to meet it, because it can be hard to speak up and say, hey, I need help, especially if you think that they won't give it to you. But even speaking up for yourself at least says, okay, maybe nobody else will speak up for my needs, but I will. And if nobody else is there to help you, okay, well, what can you do to make it easier? Can you use paper plates? You don't have to do dishes afterwards. Can you warm up leftovers instead of making something new? Can you, what are your needs, and you meet them if nobody else will.
Yeah.
But it's hard. It's hard to value ourselves after years and years of putting ourselves down and not valuing ourselves.
Yeah.
And speak up for ourselves. I find oftentimes that if you ask yourself, what is this food saying for me? What is it saying that I can't say?
I like that.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, I was mad at my husband the other day, and I found myself just quickly eating like 2 little cheesecakes that my niece brought over, little individual ones. Then I found myself just eating them, like didn't enjoy them, didn't whatever, kind of was sneaking them. And that would have been a good time to ask myself, what is it saying for me right now? And I couldn't say what I wanted to say, and it was almost like it was shoving the words back down my throat so I keep my mouth shut. That didn't do me any good, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, should we talk about chapter 5? Have you had a chance to look at it?
I haven't recently, but I did. Let's see, where am I? I had read, I'm on page 53. So I started it, but it's been a little bit since I read that.
Okay, good. Well, this is all about the rejecting the diet mentality. And it, it's so interesting. We're at this point where we're saying, okay, I can never diet again, so I've just done that. But I find that the diet mentality comes back constantly and is a constant battle to not get sucked into that world, or to not feel like somehow you should be in that world, Mm-hmm. But I think it's interesting. It says right at the beginning of that on page 40 that the biggest barrier to rejecting the diet mentality is fear. And I totally get that. Of course, I always feel like fear is my major barrier to everything. But it is fear because it's like, well, if I give that up, will I actually gain more weight? Will I never be able to lose this weight? Will people reject me because they think I'm being stupid? Can you think of other fears that pop up? And you think of never doing it again?
Well, when you said people, I think of my mom because she's a Weight Watcher lifetime member. And so, when I did that for a while after I quit, she was like, you quit? Why would you, she doesn't say a whole lot, but I make up stuff in my mind about what I think she's thinking. And
what you think she's thinking. Yeah. Yeah, I get that. Oh, I am a Weight Watchers lifetime member. I used to be a leader, right?
Yeah.
So I totally get that. There's that fear. It's one thing if you're at your, at a normal weight and you stop dieting, people don't, I don't think people would say much, but when you're overweight and you stop, then I have a feeling that people are like, look at you like, well, that was a stupid thing to do. But that's okay because we know that that doesn't mean that we've given up on ourselves. It just means that we're learning to trust ourselves and to learn to follow our internal cues rather than trusting other people.
Yeah.
So saying we're giving up dieting doesn't mean what the hell, I'm doing whatever I feel like doing. You know what I mean? Which I think is, the interpretation that a lot of people have. So I like how it goes through the fears and then it gives you the reality of the fears. So like the first one says, if I stop dieting, I won't stop eating. That's the first major fear. But then it says the reality is that dieting is often the trigger for overeating. And then once your body learns to trust that you will not be starving it anymore, the drive to overeat decreases. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. I also think you need to add in the emotional, dealing with those emotional things like we just talked about, right? That we're also working on dealing with the real needs that we have, because oftentimes it's not just, I haven't had this food for a long time, therefore I'm craving it. Sometimes it's just, I feel like shoving down this emotion. And so that's why later on it obviously deals with, you have to be willing to deal with the emotions without eating. So they do go hand in hand.
Time on this? I mean, does it just this one, or I guess if they all go together, it could take years, but just this one of, diets trigger overeating. Mm-hmm. Can you, how long does this take? If I've stopped dieting?
Oh, I don't think that by itself takes a long time. I think it's just that, just think it's that mental, once you get to the point where you really have, where you know that you really do have permission to eat whatever you want to eat when you want to eat it, and you kind of get over that initial, woohoo, it's a party, yeah. kind of thing. Yeah, I don't think your body takes forever to make up for that. I think your body just needs to know, okay, we're being normal now. And we're staying normal. Like I said before, I never did anything but diet or binge. My body didn't know anything normal,
I'm watching a friend do that. She's doing these diet bets, and then she binges when she's off, and then she starts them over, and I'm just like,
yeah,
I'm so sad for you.
I know, it's miserable. It's miserable. And it always feels like this next one's going to be the one. you
Mhm.
know. And it talks about that in this thing when it goes on the different traps. And so, yeah, we'll get there. Just the second fear real quick that talks about, I don't know how to eat when I'm not dieting, right? And I think that's when you diet a long time, it's really hard to believe. But it's so funny how basic it is to think, oh no, my body actually tells me when I'm hungry and it tells me when I'm full. It's so basic.
Yeah.
And yet we've learned to completely ignore that.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. I like it gives that analogy about learning how to swim. Think about that when you're feeling like, okay, I'm getting this, but so slow. It is like learning how to swim. You don't just go in, you know, you hear the old analogy, people throwing them in the lake and then they just figure out how to swim somehow, you know, it's like, no, you go in, you get your feet wet, you know, you learn to feel safe in the water and eventually you'll put your head underwater. But, you know, it's okay that it takes a little bit of a process to get confident with that. And even the first time you put your head underwater, you're not comfortable. It's terrifying, right? And then later you get to where you can put it underwater longer and longer, and then you can, you know, coordinate the stroke so you can do it without even thinking about it. But it's a good analogy. I like that. And then the fear that you'll be out of control. I think that's the biggest one.
Yeah.
And I like that they said, you know, control is not an issue with intuitive eating because nobody can be the expert but you. You're the only one that can control you. And yet we've been in these battles, these control battles over our food and our bodies for a long time, when all along we were the only ones that could control it. Right. Okay. So we've got the little, you know, well, I'll go into the different dietings, but it talks about the one last diet trap. And I think that's kind of like what you were saying with your friend. You get that, this will be the last one. I'll do it. I'll get down there and I'll be so happy that I'm there that I wouldn't do anything to ruin that. I've ruined that 1,000 times. You know, even when I was down there, it was surprising how unhappy I still was. You know, I was at the same weight after I had my first daughter, and I was at the same weight as when I was in the Miss Utah pageant, and I was miserable, right? And somehow in my head, instead of realizing something up here has to change, I just thought, well, I still need to lose 15 more pounds, and then that'll solve it. You know, which is how crazy is that? Right. Let's see. Okay, they give a couple of good examples. I'm going to skip some of those so we can be done right on time for you. But, you know, just the examples of the women who, you know, were really making progress. And then the next thing you know, they're, okay, but if I just hurried and did this quick diet and finished losing all the weight, then I could work on the intuitive eating stuff and I would be just fine. I posted a thing on the Facebook. I don't know if you saw it about, said it was a Janine Roth quote. And she said, the way you get there, how'd she say it? The way you get there is who you're going to be when you arrive.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like that because, you know, we think somehow we can do this crazy restrictive thing and get to this weight and we'll somehow be happy. No, we'll be crazy and we'll still be crazy when we get there. But it's like, no, the process of, you know, being kind to yourself and having peace and working your way through all that is that's how, you know, however you work on getting there, that's who you're still going to be when you get there. So we want to be, you know, at peace in the process.
Yeah.
Okay, so then they go into, you know, the pseudo dieting. A lot of people will say, well, I'm not dieting. And, you know, so they give the examples of what it means, kind of pseudo dieting. And they say, you know, if you're meticulously counting carbohydrate grams, and I would add to that, you know, fat grams or, you know, anything like that. Eating only safe foods, right? I went through stages where it was like, I'm only going to have, you know, this list of things and everything else on the list is, I'm just not going to have those anymore.
Yeah.
Eating only at certain times of the day, paying penance for eating bad foods. Back when I lost all my weight on Weight Watchers after I had my first baby, I was so obsessive, compulsive about it that my husband took me on this really nice date out for a sleigh ride and stuff up in Park City. And I remember it was before the day of points. I don't remember what we were counting back then, but I remember being slightly over what I was allowed to have. And so coming home late at night and just stepping up and down the stairs for like 40 minutes to make up for the last few little things I couldn't, you know, that I had gone over or something like that. And I look back at that now and I'm like, that would have made a hill of beans of difference. And yet I was just obsessed. Everything had to be just perfect. And I had to pay my penance, right? Because I went over like this much. Cutting back on food because, especially if you have a special event, I've got a wedding, I've got my trip in December, that kind of thing. Pacifying hunger with diet soda, coffee, that kind of stuff. Limiting carbs, putting on a false food face. Oh my gosh, I'm guilty of that sometimes. And I think that's hard because we're worried about being judged. So it's hard to say, this is what I really feel like eating right now. I'm going to do that, even though the whole world is watching me. Yeah. Right. So that's something to work on being authentic. Competing with someone else who's dieting, that's huge. Second guessing or judging what you deserve to eat based on what you've eaten earlier in the day. So I already had a grilled cheese sandwich earlier today. What I really want now is, a creamy soup, but since I already had a grilled cheese, I probably should have the chicken noodle soup, And then becoming a vegetarian or gluten-free just for the purpose of losing weight. Tons of people doing that now. Yeah. Okay, and then on page 46 talks about the dieter's dilemma. You've got that little graph, or not graph, but the little chart there that shows, we have the desire to be thin, so that leads to dieting. Then dieting leads to cravings and reduced self-control. And then we regain the weight, and usually a little bit more. In fact, statistics show it's about 10% more each time. And I've proven that to be true. And then we have the desire to be thin because we're overweight. So then we diet and we just keep going in this circle. And the only way to quit that is to step off the dieting thing. But I think most people don't even realize that that's an option, to be honest with you. Yeah. I don't even think they think it's an option. Okay. So the last part is about, how to let go of the diet mentality. I like this because, like I said, as much as I think I'm over it, sometimes it pops back in my head, right? Or I'll even find myself, without even thinking about it, thinking about how many points something I'm eating is. Like I got it so memorized that I could tell you immediately, what goes into my head. So, they talk about Stephen Covey. Did you ever read his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People?
No, but I've heard all kinds of stuff of it.
Yeah, he's such a genius. But, I like it. Even he says that people are often tempted to remedy a problem without regards to the long-term implications of the quick fix, right? And then we just make the problem worse. And that's exactly what dieting is. So, all right. So the first thing is we have to be aware of the biological and the health damage that we cause by dieting. I think most people don't even realize that they're causing damage. So just some of the highlights here on this section says that chronic dieting teaches the body to retain more fat when you start eating again. I've already told you about the Biggest Loser study. That was so impressive for me. It also shows that the weight loss slows down with each time you diet. I experienced that. Decreased metabolism, increased binges and cravings, increased risk of premature death and heart disease. That one's freaking me out. When I read that to prepare for this lesson again, it's been on my mind every time it's just popped in my head a million times this week, where it talks about that yo-yo dieters have twice the normal risk of dying from heart disease. And that has nothing to do with their starting weight. Like, oh, well, that would be me.
So like smoking, you quit after 50 years, and then is your risk still that high after you've quit? Or does it decrease the older you get in the,
I really don't know. That's a good question. We should see.
So is there hope for us or not?
All we can do is the best we can do, right? Obviously, as soon as we stop, we're going to be giving ourselves less problems than before. So, yeah, interesting, because the statistic that the Harvard study showed was that people who gain and lose at least 11 pounds within a decade don't live as long as those with a stable weight. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can gain and lose 11 pounds in a month, let alone a decade. Right? So, yeah. And then on page 49, talks about how your satiety cues begin to atrophy the more you diet. And the body shape changes. I experienced that too. I don't like that. I used to never, ever, ever have any weight on my waist or stomach. It was always my hips and my butt. Now I got tons on my abs and stuff. And they say that oftentimes it comes back in the abdominal area, and that's the higher risk fat. That's the stuff that is worse for your heart than where you had it before. I'm like, oh, great. Okay. And then it gives some other, physiological things. And then we've got psychological, emotional damage. We're very well versed in those things, right? It talks about how dieting is linked to eating disorders. So 15-year-olds who diet are 8 times more likely to have eating disorders than those who don't. Or people who diet by the time they're 15 are more likely to have eating disorders. Dieting may cause stress or make dieters more vulnerable to its effects, independent of weight. So dieting can cause stress in and of itself, is what they're saying. And then it deals with, they're correlated with feelings of failure, lower self-esteem, and social anxiety. And then it says that dieters are more vulnerable to like binging when they feel like they've broken a diet rule, right? And people who normally might eat something that, same thing, they just don't panic about it as much. They don't continue to overeat as much as people who diet tend to do that. Okay, so we want to be well aware of why we're giving up the dieting is what they're saying. And then step 2 is to become aware of the diet mentality traits and thinking. This is on page 50. It says, forget willpower. Yeah. We blame willpower all the time. And yet, they give the example of the female lawyer who was really successful, very disciplined, and yet she felt like she had no willpower in the area of food. Isn't it interesting that we blame ourselves all the time? It's like, well, maybe there's something wrong with that specific area, not just your ability to do what you set out to do. You obviously are a very disciplined person, right? Yeah. Forget about being obedient. Are you familiar with can you relate to the forget you eating? You know what I'm talking about? So they talk about, forget you eating. That's like when somebody tells you what you should or shouldn't be eating or how much you should and shouldn't weigh. And you're like, I eat whatever I feel like eating. Next thing you know, you've eaten a sleeve of Oreos, right? It's kind of it's the control struggle again. It's the don't tell me what to do and like me for who I am, and I'll figure out what I want to eat on my own.
Yeah.
I know that was a big challenge for me, and it's hard because we have our agency over ourselves and we will fight fiercely to defend it. And yet sometimes we do that by hurting ourselves instead of doing what's, kind of giving up that fight and being comfortable in the fact that, yeah, I do have control over my own self and what I put in my body. And I don't have to prove it by hurting my body to prove to you that I can do what I want. Right.
Yeah.
That's why I think it's really important to speak up against, anybody that tries to make comments about your weight or food. Do you have issues with that? Do you have anybody in your life that really tries to control what you eat?
I don't think so. My kids are trying to get used to this new way of eating, and I haven't told them what I'm doing really, and just, told them I'm not restricting myself, so they're not controlling me, but they'll say things just because they were so used to me not, eating a certain way for so many years.
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel like they're controlling me. I just feel like they're just trying to get used to it. But they do say stuff.
Like what?
Like, Mom, you shouldn't eat that, or Mom, why are you eating that? Or,
So what do you say?
I say I'm eating it because I want to, or I'm not restricting myself anymore. Whatever I want to.
How do you feel inside when they say you shouldn't eat that?
I don't know. I'll have to pay attention to that.
Is there a twinge of guilt?
Probably.
I know for me, when somebody uses the word should or shouldn't to me, You should do this. You shouldn't do that. There's like a little part in my chest that just tightens up. Kind of like that. Do not tell me what to do. That really bothers me. Or I'll agree with them in my head and think, yeah, you're right. I shouldn't be eating this. Right. So I think it's okay to say, you know what? I've learned that dieting causes more problems than it solves. And I still want to take care of my body. But what I'm learning to do is pay attention to my own body and to learn to trust my own body cues when I'm hungry, when I'm satisfied. And so I'm practicing this intuitive eating right now.
Okay.
I think it's okay to just tell them what you're doing and explain it so they don't think you're going off the rails. You can just say, I'm learning to trust my body. I'm not going to listen to the way of the world anymore. Okay. Or it's also okay. I mean, I think with kids, you kind of have to educate them a bit. But I think it's okay with people too to say, yeah, and I don't know that I'd say this to your kids. I don't know. You'd have to decide that. But I think it's okay to tell people, I'd really appreciate it if you didn't comment on what I eat. Or, that's kind of a personal decision or whatever, you know what I mean? If there's people who feel that it's okay for them to comment on your weight or what you should or shouldn't be eating, I think it's okay to set up a boundary on what's comfortable, because I actually had to do that where I had to tell somebody in my life, I think you know who that is, that it was really bothering me. And I had to get to the point where I said, I just appreciate it if you didn't comment on that anymore. I'm a big girl. I can decide for myself what I want to eat. And it didn't go over very well at first. And over time that just became fine, and took a while, several months actually, before there was a tension about that. But then it was something I was able to own better and get out of this battle, this internal battle of me feeling like I want to take control of my own body, but you don't support me, and all that stuff. Okay, last couple things real quick. So we have 2 minutes left. So we want to get rid of the dieting tools. I'd love to talk to you about the scale thing sometime and how you feel about that. I think that's one of the hardest things to deal with. Yeah. And of course, it goes through how a pound is not a pound. It talks about how every time you diet and your body has to kind of cannibalize parts of itself to get the right protein, and it'll take away, like say it's eating part of your muscle for the protein. Most of that weight, when you lose a piece of your muscle, is actually water, because it has to have so much water to maintain that muscle. So when it cannibalizes part of that muscle, you lose a lot of water weight that went along with that muscle. And so recognizing that the scale is just measuring the totality of your weight, not how much fat you have. And of course, being compassionate with yourself, which is what you've been working on. And then I love what it says at the end. It says, they call them intuitive eating power tools, and then they put in their empowerment tools. So you think of like power tools, empowerment tools. And that's basically what we're going to be working on. And then the last quote that I typed up here was, what do you do if you're hungry and did you read the thing about what a diet is not a diet? And it was all about Weight Watchers?
I don't remember.
Okay, on page 58, you'll see that. It talks about how Weight Watchers is every bit a diet as everything else. Do you have that in your book?
Yep.
And, people say, but it's not a diet. I can eat whatever you want. And they'll ask the question, they'll say, what do you do if you're hungry and your points are used up?
Yeah.
And they say the reply is usually, oh, how did you know? Which is usually followed by a deep sigh, they said, right? And so, yeah, same thing, just learning to trust and honor our bodies. So what is your goal for the week? I'll give you the food for thought. This is basically just going to give you some more questions to work on. But what kind is your goal for the week?
I'm going to read the rest of chapter 5 and chapter 6. And I'm going to try to ask myself the question of what is food saying for me, or, trying to be aware of those emotions when I'm wanting to eat, and just be aware.
Yeah. And you've already identified those 3 that are the big challenges for you. So use those as your quick, okay, is it this? Is it this? Is it this?
Okay.
and see if those things come up quickly for you.
And I'll have to try to come up with something. What is going on?
Yeah.
This
Okay,
is
we'll look at chapter 6 next week
okay.
since you're running late. All right, sounds good. Well, I hope everything goes well with your mother-in-law's appointment.
Thanks.
All right, I'll put this online and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye.